Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we will be continuing with my read aloud of City of Fallen Angels by Cassie Clare, and we will be continuing with chapter 5, which is called Hell Calls Hell. But before we begin the reading, I just have to make the quick disclaimer that I don't own any of the text being presented here, nor am I trying to present any of it as my own. This is all simply a read aloud that I'm doing on this channel for entertainment purposes, and everything is in fair use. And of course, everything in the Shadowhunters Chronicles is owned by Cassie Clare. So this is chapter 5, Hell Calls Hell. Kyle's apartment turned out to be a pleasant surprise. Simon expected a filthy walk-up in an Avenue D tenement, with roaches crawling on the walls, and a bed made out of mattress foam and milk crates. In reality, it was a clean two-bedroom with a small living area, a ton of bookshelves, and lots of photos on the walls of famous surfing spots. Admittedly, Kyle seemed to be growing marijuana plants on the fire escape, but you couldn't have everything. Simon's room was basically an empty box. Whoever had lived there before had left nothing behind but a futon mattress, and bare walls, bare floors, and a single window, through which Simon could see the neon sign of the Chinese restaurant across the street. "You like it?" Kyle inquired, hovering in the doorway, his hazel eyes open and friendly. "It's great," Simon replied honestly. "Exactly what I needed." The most expensive item in the apartment was the flat-screen TV in the living room. They threw themselves down on the futon couch and watched bad TV as the sunlight dimmed outside. Kyle was cool, Simon decided. He didn't poke, didn't pry, didn't ask questions. He didn't seem to want anything in exchange for the room except for Simon to pitch in grocery money. He was just a friendly guy. Simon wondered if he'd forgotten what ordinary human beings were like. After Kyle headed out to work an evening shift, Simon went into his room, collapsed on the mattress, and listened to the traffic going on by Avenue B. He'd been haunted by thoughts of his mother's face since he'd left, the way she'd looked at him with loathing and fear, as if he were an intruder in her house. Even if he didn't need to breathe, the thought of it still constricted his chest. But now, when he was a kid, he'd always liked traveling, because being in a new place had meant being away from all his problems. Even here, just a river away from Brooklyn, the memories that had been eating at him like acid, the mugger's death, his mother's reaction to the truth of what he was, seemed blurred and distant. Maybe that was the secret, he thought. Keep moving, like a shark. Go to where no one can find you. A fugitive and a wanderer shalt thou be in the earth. But that only worked if there was no one you cared about leaving behind. He slept fitfully all night. His natural urge was to sleep during the day, despite his daylighter powers, and he fought off restlessness and dreams before waking up late with the sun streaming in through the window. After throwing on clean clothes from his knapsack, he left the bedroom to find Kyle in the kitchen, frying bacon and eggs in a Teflon pan. "Hey, roommate," Kyle greeted him cheerfully. "Want some breakfast?" The sight of the food made Simon feel vaguely sick to his stomach. "No thanks, I'll take some coffee though." He perched himself on one of the slightly lopsided bar stools. Kyle pushed a chipped mug across the counter toward him. "Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, bro, even if it's already noon." Simon put his hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into his cold skin. He cast about for a topic of conversation, one that wasn't how little he ate. "So I never asked you yesterday, what do you do for a living?" Kyle picked a piece of bacon out of the pan and bit into it. Simon noticed that the gold medal at his throat had the imprint of a wolf's paw on it, and the words Beati Bedecosi. Beati, Simon knew, was a word that had something to do with saints. Kyle must be Catholic. "Bike messenger," he said, chewing. "It's awesome. I get to ride around the city, seeing everything, talking to everyone. Way better than high school. You dropped out? Got my GED senior year. I prefer the school of life." Simon would have thought Kyle sounded ridiculous if it weren't for the fact that he said school of life, the way he said everything else, with total sincerity. "What about you? Any plans?" "Oh, you know, wander the earth, causing death and destruction to innocent people. Maybe drink some blood, live forever, but never have any fun. The usual. I'm kind of winging it at the moment." "You mean you don't want to be a musician?" Kyle asked. To Simon's relief, his phone rang before he had to answer that. He fished it out of his pocket and looked at the screen. It was Maya. "Hey," he greeted her. "What's up? Are you going to be at that dress fitting with Clary this afternoon?" she asked, her voice crackling down the line. She was probably calling from PAC headquarters in Chinatown, where the reception wasn't great. "She told me she was making you go to keep her company." "What? Oh, right. Yes, I'll be there." Clary had demanded that Simon accompany her to the bridesmaid's dress fitting, so afterward they could shop for comics and she could feel, in her words, less of a frilled up girly girl. "Well, I'm going to come too then. I have to give Luke a message from the PAC, and besides, I feel I haven't seen you in ages." "I know, I'm really sorry." "It's fine," she said lightly, "but you're going to have to let me know what you're wearing to the wedding eventually, because otherwise we'll clash." She hung up, leaving Simon staring at the phone. Clary had been right. The wedding was D-Day, and he was woefully unprepared for the battle. "One of your girlfriends?" Kyle asked curiously. "Was that redheaded chick at the garage one of them? Because she was cute." "No, that's Clary. She's my best friend," Simon pocketed. "And she has a boyfriend. Like, really, really, really has a boyfriend. The nuclear bomb of boyfriends. Trust me on this one." Kyle grinned. "I was just asking." He dumped the bacon pan, now empty, into the sink. "So, your two girlfriends, what are they like?" "They're very, very different." In some ways, Simon thought they were opposites. Maya was calm and grounded. Isabel lived at a high pitch of excitement. Maya was a steady light in the darkness. Isabel a burning star, spinning through the void. I mean, they're both great, beautiful, and smart, and they don't know about each other. Kyle leaned against the counter. "Like, at all?" Simon found himself explaining how when he'd come back from Idris, though he didn't mention the place by name, they'd both started calling him wanting to hang out. And because he liked them both, he went. And somehow, things started to turn casually romantic with each of them. But there never seemed to be a chance to explain to either of them that he was seeing someone else too. And somehow it had snowballed. And here he was, not wanting to hurt either of them, and not knowing how to go on either. "Well, if you ask me," Kyle said, turning to dump his remaining coffee out in the sink, "you ought to pick up one of them and quit dogging around. I'm just saying." Since his back was to Simon, Simon couldn't see his face, and for a moment he wondered if Kyle was actually angry. His voice sounded uncharacteristically stiff, but when Kyle turned around, his expression was as open and friendly as ever. Simon decided he must have imagined it. "I know," he said. "You're right." He glanced back toward the bedroom. "Look, are you sure it's okay? Me staying here? I can clear out whatever. It's fine. You stay as long as you need." Kyle opened a kitchen drawer and scrabbled around until he found what he was looking for. A set of spare keys on a rubber band ring. "There's a set for you. You're totally welcome here, okay? I gotta go to work, but you can hang out around if you want, play Halo or whatever. Will you be here when I get back?" Simon shrugged. "Probably not. I have a dress fitting to get to at 3. "Cool," said Kyle, slinging a messenger bag over his shoulder and heading toward the door. "Get them to make you something in red. It's totally your color." "So," Clary said, stepping out of the dressing room, "what do you think?" She did an experimental twirl. Simon balanced on one of Karen's bridal shop's uncomfortable white chairs, shifted position, and winced and said, "You look nice." She looked better than nice. Clary was her mother's only bridesmaid, so she'd been allowed to pick out whatever dress she wanted. She'd selected a very simple coppery silk with narrow straps that flattered her small frame. Her only jewelry was the Morgenstern ring, worn on a chain around her neck. The very plain silver chain brought out the shape of her collarbones and the curve of her throat. Not that many months ago, seeing Clary dressed up for a wedding would have conjured up in Simon a mix of feelings. Dark despair, she would never love him, and high excitement. Or maybe she would, if he could get up the nerve to tell her how he felt. Now it just made him feel a little wistful. "Nice?" Clary echoed. Is that it? Sheesh. She turned to Maya. "What do you think?" Maya had given up on the uncomfortable chairs and was sitting on the floor, her back against a wall that was decorated with tiaras and long gauzy veils. She had Simon's DS balanced on one of her knees and seemed to be at least partly absorbed in playing Grand Theft Auto. "Don't ask me," she said. "I hate dresses. I'd just wear jeans to the wedding if I could." This was true. Simon rarely saw Maya out of jeans and t-shirts. In that way, she was the opposite of Isabel. who wore dresses and heels at even the most inappropriate times, though since he'd once seen her dispatch a vermis demon with the stiletto heel of a boot, she was less inclined to worry about it. The shop bell tinkled, and Jocelyn came in, followed by Luke. Both were holding steaming cups of coffee, and Jocelyn was looking up at Luke, her cheeks flushed and her eyes shining. Simon remembered what Clary had said about them being disgustingly in love. He didn't find it disgusting himself, though that was probably because they weren't his parents. They both seemed so happy, and he thought it was actually rather nice. Jocelyn's eyes widened when she saw Clary. "Honey, you look gorgeous!" "Yeah, you have to say it. You're my mother," Clary said, but she grinned back. "Hey, is that coffee black by any chance?" "Yep, consider it a we're sorry we're late gift," Luke said, handing her the cup. "We got held up. Some catering issue or other." He nodded toward Simon and Maya. "Hey, guys!" Maya inclined her head. Luke was the head of the local wolf pack, of which Maya was a member, though he'd broken her of the habit of calling him Mr. or Sir. She remained respectful in his presence. "I brought you a message from the pack," she said, setting down her game console. "They have questions about the party at the Ironworks." As Maya and Luke fell into conversation about the party the wolf pack was throwing in honor of their alpha wolf's marriage, the owner of the bridal shop, a tall woman who had been reading magazines behind the counter while the teenagers chatted, realized that the people who were actually going to pay for the dress had just arrived, and hurried forward to greet them. "I just got your dress back in, and it looks marvelous," she gushed, taking Clary's mother by the arm and steering her toward the back of the store. "Come and try it on." As Luke started after them, she pointed a threatening finger at Luke. "You stay here." Luke, watching his fiancée disappear through a set of white swinging doors painted with wedding bells, looked puzzled. Mundane think you're not supposed to see the bride in her wedding dress before the ceremony," Clary reminded him. "It's bad luck. She probably thinks it's weird you came to the fitting." "But Jocelyn wanted my opinion." Luke broke off and shook his head. "Ah, well, mundane customs are so peculiar." He threw himself down in a chair and winced as one of the curved rosettes poked into his back. "Ouch! What about Shadowhunter weddings?" Maya inquired. "Do they have their own customs?" "They do," Luke said slowly. "But this isn't going to be a classic Shadowhunter ceremony. Those specifically don't address any situation in which one of the participants is not a Shadowhunter." "Really?" Maya looked shocked. "I didn't know that. Part of a Shadowhunter marriage ceremony involves tracing permanent runes on the bodies of the participants," said Luke. His voice was calm, but his eyes looked sad. "Runes of love and commitment. Of course, non-Shadowhunters can't bear the angels' runes, so Jocelyn and I will be exchanging rings instead." "That sucks," Maya pronounced. At that, Luke smiled. "Not really. Marrying Jocelyn is all I ever wanted, and I'm not that buttered about the particulars. Besides, things are changing. The new council members have made a lot of headway toward convincing the Clave to tolerate the sort of—" "Clary!" It was Jocelyn calling from the back of the store. "Can you come here for a second?" "Coming!" Clary called, bolting down the last of her coffee. "Uh-oh, sounds like a dress emergency. Well, good luck with that." Maya got to her feet and dropped the DS back in Simon's lap before bending to kiss him on the cheek. "I've got to go. I'm meeting some friends at the Hunter's Moon." She smelled pleasantly of vanilla. Under that, as always, Simon could smell the salt scent of blood, mixed with a sharp, lemony tang that was peculiar to werewolves. Every Downwelder's blood smelled different. Fairies smelled like dead flowers, warlocks like burnt matches, and other vampires like metal. Clary had once asked him what Shadowhunters smelled like. "Sunlight," he'd said. "See you later, baby." Maya straightened up, ruffled Simon's hair once, and departed. As the door closed behind her, Clary fixed him with a piercing glare. "You must work your love life out by next Saturday," she said. "I mean it, Simon. If you don't tell them, I will." Luke looked bewildered. "Tell who what?" Clary shook her head at Simon. "You're on thin ice, Lewis." With a pronouncement she flounced away. With which pronouncement she flounced away, holding up her silk skirts as she went. Simon was amused to note that underneath them she was wearing green sneakers. Clearly, said Luke, something is going on that I don't know about. Simon looked over at him. Sometimes I think that's the motto of my life. Luke raised his eyebrows. Has something happened? Simon hesitated. He certainly couldn't tell Luke about his love life, Luke and Maya were in the same pack, and werewolf packs were more loyal than street gangs. It would put Luke in a very awkward position. It was true, though, that Luke was also a resource. As the leader of the Manhattan Wolf Pack, he had access to all sorts of information, and was well versed in downworlder politics. Have you heard of a vampire named Camille? Luke made a low whistling sound. I know who she is. I'm surprised you do. Well, she's the head of the New York vampire clan. I do know something about them, Simon said a little stiffly. I didn't realize you did. I thought you wanted to live like a human as much as you could. There was no judgment in Luke's voice, only curiosity. Now, by the time I took over the downtown pack from the previous pack leader, she had put Raphael in charge. I don't think anyone knew where she'd gone exactly, but she was something of a legend. An extraordinarily old vampire, from everything I understand. Famously cruel and cunning. She could give the fair folk a run for their money. Have you ever seen her? Luke shook his head. Don't think I have, no. Why the curiosity? Raphael mentioned her, Simon said vaguely. Luke's forehead creased. You've seen Raphael lately? Before Simon could answer, the shop bell sounded again, and to Simon's surprise, Jace came in. Clary hadn't mentioned he was coming. In point of fact, he realized Clary hadn't mentioned Jace much lately at all. Jace looked from Luke to Simon. He looked as if he were madly surprised to see Simon and Luke there, although it was hard to tell. Though Simon imagined that Jace ran the gamut of facial expressions when he was alone with Clary, his default one around other people was a fierce sort of blankness. He looks, Simon had said once to Isabel, like he's thinking about something deep and meaningful. But if you ask him what it is, he'll punch you in the face. So don't ask him, Isabel had said, as if she thought Simon was being ridiculous. No one says you two need to be friends. Is Clary here? Jace asked, shutting the door behind him. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes, and he didn't seem to have bothered to put on a jacket, despite the fact that the autumn wind was brisk. Though cold no longer affected Simon much, looking at Jace in just jeans and a thermal shirt made him feel chilly. She's helping Jocelyn, explained Luke, but you're welcome to wait here with us. Jace looked around uneasily at the walls, hung with veils, fans, tiaras, and seed pearl-encrusted trains. Everything is so white. Of course it's white, said Simon. It's a wedding. White for Shadowhunters is the color of funerals, Luke explained, but for mundanes, Jace, it's the color of weddings. Brides wear white to symbolize their purity. I thought Jocelyn said her dress wasn't white, Simon said. Well, said Jace, I suppose that ship has sailed. Luke choked on his coffee. Before he could say or do anything, Clary walked back into the room. Her hair was up now in sparkling pins, with a few curls hanging loose. I don't know, she was saying as she came closer to them. Karen got her hands on me and did my hair, but I'm not sure about the sparkles. She broke off as she saw Jace. It was clear from her expression that she hadn't been expecting him either. Her lips parted in surprise, but she said nothing. Jace, in his turn, was staring at her, and for once in his life, Simon could read Jace's expression like a book. It was as if everything else in the world had fallen away for Jace but himself and Clary, and he was looking at her with an unconcealed yearning and desire that made Simon feel awkward, as if he had somehow walked in on a private moment. Jace cleared his throat. You look beautiful. Jace! Clary looked more puzzled than anything else. Is everything all right? I thought you said you couldn't come because of the conclave meeting. That's right, Luke said. I heard about the Shadowhunter body in the park. Is there any news? Jace shook his head, looking at Clary. No, he's not one of the New York conclave members. But beyond that, he hasn't been identified. Neither of the bodies have. The Silent Brothers are looking at them now. That's good. The brothers will figure out who they are, said Luke. Jace said nothing. He was still looking at Clary, and it was the oddest sort of look, Simon thought, the sort of look you might give someone you loved but could never ever have. He imagined Jace had felt like that about Clary once before, but now? Jace, Clary said, and took a step toward him. He tore his gaze away from her. That jacket you borrowed from me in the park yesterday, he said. Do you still have it? Now looking even more puzzled, Clary pointed to where the item of clothing in question, a perfectly ordinary brown suede jacket, was hanging over the back of one of the chairs. It's over there. I was expecting to bring it to you after. Well, said Jace. Well, said Jace, in that calming tone he had. We're going to get an early dinner in Park Slope after this. You're welcome to come along. Well, said Jace, picking it up and thrusting his arms hastily into the sleeves as if he were suddenly in a hurry. Now you don't have to. Jace, Luke said in that calming tone he had. We're going to get an early dinner in Park Slope after this. You're welcome to come along. No, Jace said, zipping the jacket up. I've got training this afternoon. I'd better head out. Training? Clary echoed. But we trained yesterday. Some of us have to train every day, Clary. Jace didn't sound angry, but there was a harshness to his tone, and Clary flushed. I'll see you later, he added, without looking at her, and practically flung himself toward the door. As it shut behind him, Clary reached up and angrily yanked the pins out of her hair. It cascaded in tangles down around her shoulders. Clary, Luke said gently. He stood up. What are you doing? My hair! She yanked the last pin out hard. Her eyes were shining, and Simon could tell she was forcibly willing herself not to cry. I don't want to wear it like this. It looks stupid. No, it doesn't. Luke took the pins from her and set them down on one of the small white end tables. Look, weddings make men nervous, okay? It doesn't mean anything. Right, Clary tried to smile. She nearly managed it, but Simon could tell she didn't believe Luke. He could hardly blame her. After seeing the look on Jace's face, Simon didn't believe him either. In the distance, a Fifth Avenue diner was lit up. In the distance, the Fifth Avenue diner was lit up like a star against the blue twilight. Simon walked beside Clary down the avenue blocks. Jocelyn and Luke a few steps ahead of them. Clary had changed out of her dress and was back in jeans now. A thick white scarf wound around her neck. Every once in a while, she would reach up and twirl the ring on the chain around her neck, a nervous gesture he wondered if she was even aware of. When they'd left the bridal store, he had asked her if she knew what was wrong with Jace, but she hadn't really answered him. She'd shrugged it off and started asking him about what was going on with him, if he'd talked to his mother yet, and whether he minded staying with Eric. When he told her he was crashing with Kyle, she was surprised. But you hardly even know him, she said. He could be a serial killer. I did have that thought. I checked the apartment out. But if he's got an ice cooler full of arms in it, I haven't seen it yet. Anyway, he seems pretty sincere. So what's his apartment like? Nice for Alphabet City. You should come over later. Not tonight, Clary said a little absently. She was fiddling with the ring again. Maybe tomorrow? Going to see Jace? Simon thought, but he didn't press the point. If she didn't want to talk about it, he wasn't going to make her. Here we are. He opened the diner door for her, and a blast of warm, souvlaki-smelling air hit them. They found a booth over by one of the big flat-screen TVs that lined the walls. They crowded into it as Jocelyn and Luke chatted animatedly with each other about wedding plans. Luke's pack, it seemed, felt insulted that they hadn't been invited to the ceremony, even though the guest list was tiny, and were insisting on holding their own celebration in a renovated factory in Queens. Clary listened, not saying anything. The waitress came around, handing out menus so stiffly laminated that they could have been used as weapons. Simon set his own on the table and stared out the window. There was a gym across the street, and he could see people through the plate glass that fronted it, running on treadmills, arms pumping, headphones clamped to their ears. All that running and getting nowhere, he thought. Story of my life. He tried to force his thoughts away from dark places, and almost succeeded. This was one of the most familiar scenes in his life, he thought. A corner booth in a diner, himself and Clary and her family. Luke had always been family, even when he hadn't been about to marry Clary's mom. Simon ought to feel at home. He tried to force a smile, only to realize that Clary's mother had just asked him something, and he hadn't heard her. Everyone at the table was staring at him expectantly. Sorry, he said. I didn't... What did you say? Jocelyn smiled patiently. Clary told me you've added a new member to your band. Simon knew she was just being polite. Well, polite in that way parents were when they pretended to take your hobbies seriously. Still, she'd come to several of his gigs before, just to help fill up the room. She didn't care about him. She always had. She did care about him. She always had. In the very dark, tucked away places of his mind, Simon suspected she had always known how he felt about Clary, and he wondered if she wouldn't have wanted her daughter to make a different choice. had it been something she could control. He knew she didn't entirely like Jace. It was clear even in the way she said his name. Yeah, he said, Kyle. He's kind of a weird guy, but super nice. Invited by Luke to expand on the topic of Kyle's weirdness. Simon told him about Kyle's apartment, careful to leave out the detail that it was now his apartment too, his bike messenger job, and his accent, beat up pickup truck. And he grows these weird plants on the balcony, he added. Not pot, I checked. They have sort of silvery leaves. Luke frowned, but before he could say anything, the waitress arrived, carrying a big silver coffee pitcher. She was young, with bleached, pale hair tied into 2 braids. As she bent to fill Simon's coffee cup, one of them brushed his arm. He could smell sweat on her, and under that, blood. Human blood. The sweetest smell of all. He felt a familiar tightening in his stomach. Coldness spread through him. He was hungry, and all he had back at Kyle's place was room temperature blood that was already beginning to separate, a sickening prospect, even for a vampire. You have never fed on a human, have you? You will, and when you do, you will not forget it. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the waitress was gone and Clary was staring at him curiously across the table. Is everything okay? Fine. He closed his hand around his coffee cup. It was shaking. Above them, the TV was still blaring the nightly news. Ugh, Clary said, looking up at the screen. Are you listening to this? Simon followed her gaze. The news anchor was wearing that expression news anchors tended to wear when they were reporting on something especially grim. No one has come forward to identify an infant boy found abandoned in an alley behind Beth Israel Hospital several days ago, he was saying. The infant is white, weighs about 6 pounds and 8 ounces, and is otherwise healthy. He was discovered strapped to an infant car seat behind a dumpster in the alley. The anchor went on. Most disturbing, a handwritten note tucked into the child's blanket begged hospital authorities to euthanize the child because I don't have the strength to do it myself. Police say it is likely that the child's mother was mentally ill and claim they have promising leads. Anyone with information about this child should call Crime Stoppers at... That's so horrible, Clary said, turning away from the TV with a shudder. I can't understand how people just dump their babies off like they're trash. Jocelyn, Luke said, his voice sharp with concern. Simon looked toward Clary's mother. She was as white as a sheet and looked as if she were about to throw up. She pushed her plate away abruptly, stood up from the table, and hurried toward the bathroom. After a moment, Luke dropped his napkin and went after her. Oh, crap! Clary put her hand over her mouth. I can't believe I said that. I'm so stupid. Simon was thoroughly perplexed. What's going on? Clary slunk down in her seat. She was thinking about Sebastian, she said. I mean, Jonathan, my brother. I assume you remember him. She was being sarcastic. I mean, Jonathan, my brother. I assume you remember him. She was being sarcastic. None of them was likely to forget Sebastian, whose real name was Jonathan, and who had murdered Hodge and Max, had nearly succeeded in helping Valentine win an award that would have seen the destruction of all shadow hunters. Jonathan, who had burning black eyes and a smile like a razor blade. Jonathan, whose blood had tasted like battery acid when Simon had bitten him once. Not that he regretted it. But your mom didn't abandon him, Simon said. She was stuck with raising him, even though she knew there was something horribly wrong with him. She hated him, though, Clary said. I don't think she's ever gotten over that. Imagine hating your own baby. She used to take out a box that had his baby things in it and cry over it every year on his birthday. I think she was crying over the son she would have had. You know, if Valentine hadn't done what he had. And you would have had a brother, said Simon. Like an actual one, not a murdering psychopath. Looking close to tears, Clary pushed her plate away. I feel sick now, she said. You know that feeling like you're hungry, but you can't bring yourself to eat? Simon looked over at the bleached-haired waitress, who was leaning against the diner counter. Yeah, he said. I know. Luke returned to the table eventually, but only to tell Clary and Simon that he was taking Jocelyn home. He left some money, which they used to pay the bill, before wandering out of the diner and over to Galaxy Comics on 7th Avenue. Neither of them could concentrate enough to enjoy themselves, though, so they split up, but they promised to see each other the next day. Simon rode into the city with his hood pulled up and his iPod on, blasting music into his ears. Music had always been his way of blocking everything out. By the time he got out at 2nd Avenue and headed down Houston, a light rain had started to fall and his stomach was in knots. He cut over to 1st Street, which was mostly deserted, a strip of darkness between the bright lights of 1st Avenue and Avenue A. Because he had his iPod on, he didn't hear them coming up behind him until they were nearly on him. The first intimation he had that something was wrong was a long shadow that fell across the sidewalk, overlapping his own. Another shadow joined it, this one on his other side. He turned and saw 2 men behind him. Both were dressed exactly like the mugger who had attacked him the other night. Gray tracksuits, gray hoods pulled up to hide their faces. They were close enough to touch him. Simon leaped back, and with a force that surprised him, because his vampire strength was so new, it still had the power to shock him. When a moment later he found himself perched on the stoop of a brownstone, several feet away from the muggers, he was so astonished to be there that he froze. The muggers advanced on him. They were speaking the same guttural language as the first mugger, who, Simon was beginning to suspect, had not been a mugger at all. Muggers, as far as he knew, didn't work in gangs, and it was unlikely that the first mugger had criminal friends who would decide to take revenge on him for their comrade's demise. Something else was clearly going on here. They had reached the stoop, effectively trapping him on the steps. Simon tore his iPod headphones from his ears and hastily held his hands up. "Look," he said, "I don't know what this is about, but you really want to leave me alone." The muggers just looked at him, or at least he thought they were looking at him. Under the shadows of their hoods, it was impossible to see their faces. "I'm getting the feeling someone sent you after me," he said, "but it's a suicide mission. Seriously, I don't know what they're paying you, but it's not enough." One of the track-suited figures laughed. The other had reached into his pocket and drawn something out, something that shone black under the streetlights. A gun. "Oh, man," Simon said. "You really don't want to do that. I'm not kidding." He took a step back, up one of the stairs. Maybe if he got enough height, he could actually jump over them, or past them. Anything but let them attack him. He didn't think he could face what that meant. Not again. The man with the gun raised it. There was a click as he pulled the hammer back. Simon bit his lip. In his panic, his fangs had come out. Pain shot through him as they sank his teeth in. "Don't!" A dark object fell from the sky. At first, Simon thought something had nearly tumbled from one of the upper windows, an air conditioner ripping loose, or someone too lazy to drag their trash downstairs. But the falling thing he saw was a person, falling in direction, purpose, and grace. The person landed on the mugger, knocking him flat. The gun skittered out of his hand, and he screamed, a thin, high sound. The second mugger bent and seized the gun. Before Simon could react, the guy had raised it and pulled the trigger. A spark of flame appeared at the gun's muzzle, and the gun blew apart. It blew apart, and the mugger blew apart along with it, too fast to even scream. He had intended a quick death for Simon, and an even quicker death was what he got in return. He shattered apart like glass, the outward flying colors in a kaleidoscope. There was a soft explosion, the sound of displaced air, and then nothing but a soft drizzle of salt falling onto the pavement like a solidified rain. Simon's vision blurred, and he sank down onto the steps. He was aware of a loud humming in his ears, and then someone grabbing him roughly by the wrists and shook him hard. "Simon! Simon!" He looked up. The person grabbing him and shaking him was Jace. The other boy wasn't in gear, but was still wearing his jeans and the jacket he'd taken back from Clary. He was disheveled, his clothes and face streaked with dirt and soot. His hair was wet from the rain. "What the hell was that?" Jace asked. Simon looked up and down the street. It was still deserted. The asphalt shone black and wet and empty. The second mugger was gone. "You," he said a little groggily, "you jumped those muggers." "Those weren't muggers. They were following you since you got off the subway. Someone sent those guys." Jace spoke with complete surety. The other one, Simon said, what happened to him? He just vanished. Jace snapped his fingers. He saw what happened to his friend and he was gone. Like that. I don't know what they were exactly. Not demons, but not exactly human either. Yeah, I figured that part out, thanks. Jace looks at him more closely. What happened to that mugger? That was you, wasn't it? Your mark here. He pointed at his forehead. I saw it burn white before that guy just dissolved. Simon said nothing. I've seen a lot, Jace said. There was no sarcasm in his voice for a change, or any mockery, but I've never seen anything like that. I didn't do it, Simon said softly. I didn't do anything. You didn't have to, said Jace. His golden eyes burned in his soot-streaked face, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Okay, this was quite an interesting chapter, knowing that, okay, poor Simon, like the fact that he moved into Kyle's apartment, which, I mean, is a good thing considering he now has a safe place to stay, but the whole thing is that what kind of drives me crazy about this whole chapter is that everything is from Simon's point of view entirely throughout it, and it never once shifts to anyone else. This story is mainly for Simon and Clary, is what I could say, and Jace as well. But the whole thing with this book in particular, especially with this chapter, Hell Calls Hell, I think it's called. Yeah, Hell Calls Hell. Basically, it's Simon still not having his love life together at all whatsoever, having Maya, hanging around him and everything, and Clary pointing out, you gotta get your shit together. You are so gonna get killed. And she's completely correct. It's gonna come back to bite him in the ass. But I like that it moves into explaining some of the Shadowhunter traditions with weddings. Obviously, the biggest tradition for Shadowhunters with marriage is that the bride wears gold on her wedding day because, like in the religion of Hinduism, in Indian culture, white is what Shadowhunters wear to funerals because black is the color of their hunting gear, and white sort of symbolizes more or less them sending the souls off to get burned, and their ashes get used to build up the city of bones, more or less. And that is basically what their deaths symbolize. And even if they do end up getting into heaven at some point, their ashes are used for something that contributes to the angels' mission of ridding the world of demons. And I always find that to be the most interesting thing about Shadowhunter culture, how they have their own culture and their own faith and their own type of religion and society, which is honestly what draws me to the books in general, is how they have so many different societal rules and traditions that come from all these different religions from all over the world. And I think that is just an amazing detail that I can never quite get over every single time. And of course, one detail about this book that goes into it with this plot is the baby that was found abandoned outside Beth Israel Hospital. You eventually come to learn what that baby was. It was no ordinary, innocent looking baby at all whatsoever. But the idea that somebody would just take their child and abandon them like a piece of trash. You hear stories like that in the news all the time, where there are these young women who are junkies, drug addicts, who get brutally raped or hook up with somebody. They end up getting pregnant, and after they give birth, they just leave their kid somewhere. And of course, that's what mundanes automatically think this is the case of. But we're going to learn throughout reading the book that that is not the case at all whatsoever, that there is something seriously wrong going on, and this is one of the first indications that there's something seriously wrong. And even Simon is starting to notice that there's something off about Jace, that there's something wrong with him, that he's being followed, he's being tagged by someone, and Jace knows that somebody is following Simon. So now he is going to be spending all of his spare time not sleeping, not eating, but rather he's going to be spending all of his time trying to protect Simon from whoever it is that's got a hit out for him. And we've seen firsthand now the effects of Simon's Mark of Cain. If somebody tries to attack him, basically they shatter like glass, more or less. And that is just the craziest thing, and it's not gonna slow down at all whatsoever, and it's only going to continue with chapter 6, which is called Wake the Dead. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the reading of chapter 5, Hell Calls Hell. And if you did and you happen to be new, you can subscribe to the channel, and also be sure to leave your comments down below and let me know your thoughts and opinions on the chapter as a whole and add to the discussion. I would love to make this an open kind of discussion, since this is like our own little book club here that we have going on the channel. And also be sure to leave a like on the video as well. God bless, happy viewing, and have a nice day, everyone. See ya!